It was about 12 months ago, across the globe, that I stated this. The horse population is in decline, levy payments are falling, the whip review has been a fiasco, and the fixture list delayed. So who want to come from this thriving Australian horse world to Great Britain to solve the problem? This is the man, Paul Bittar. So with Bittar in charge, how have things changed off the track? Where on it, two horses have given British racing such a lift.
Chapman needs the line, he's easing up on her, and he's just raced in. Oh, he did, he blew it. All comers, all grounds, all beaten. Franco won the Champion Stakes and lives up to the title.
Paul, when you took the job, you knew there were things to sort out. But was the situation worse or better than you originally thought, considering we have an industry that's complicated, factionalised and betting operator orientated?
Well, Matt, I think there's a couple of aspects to that, and some I would say that some things were better and some things were probably worse, if you want to put it like that. The first part of the challenge really was to actually understand or better understand the levers that the BHA has, and I think sometimes people perhaps perceive that the BHA has greater powers than it has, or would maybe like them to have greater powers than they have. The reality is that I think that there was clearly a disconnect between the BHA and the industry. And so the first challenge was really actually to reconnect with the industry. So a lot of time, this year for me has been spent reconnecting. So I think there was a credibility issue, and because of that credibility issue, there was a gap in leadership. And so I think, as I said, our role is really about service and about leadership. So I've probably focused on those two things this year. I think the factionalised nature that you mentioned is right. And I think it's exacerbated by the fact that the economic situation with the industry is so challenging. So naturally people scrap quite a bit harder.
Of course, you came at a time when the whip debate was a massive furore, but trying to sort out the levy is the most important thing. Do you think you can achieve that by the end of October, which is the date you've always given?
Well, I think what we'll see this year is we'll see a resolution before the 31 October deadline for the 52nd levy scheme. So I'm very confident that we won't have to go to determination on that, and that actually we will reach agreement. But that's effectively a one-year agreement. Really what that does is it buys us some time to work with the major betting partners within the sport. And so those major bookmakers to try and put in place long-term commercial agreements, similar to what we did with Betfair earlier in the year. I mean, if you look at the levy, through no fault of the current custodians, but it's a complete anachronism. It serves, it has no relevance. It's not contemporary. So our challenge is to actually move to a contemporary and commercial model for the sport that effectively and fairly rewards the sport for the product that it puts on. And if you look at British racing, the quality of the product that British racing puts on is absolutely world class. In fact, it's world leading. So, our challenge with the levy is to move it. Racing's 5 tests for the levy are for it to be fair, enforceable, sustainable, commercial, and to have no government involvement. And if you look at the current levy, it is none of those things. So,
is that because it's been in place since the 1960s?
Absolutely. As I said, it's no fault of the current custodians, but it's a 50-year-old piece of legislation that simply doesn't deal with really any of today's issues or the challenges that racing faces, be it offshore betting, be it mobile betting. So our focus on the consumer means that we need to move to a more commercial and contemporary model, and that's that the 52nd levy scheme, as I said, is really it's a one-year agreement. It'll be done, but it'll be done with a view to us sitting down with the bookmakers to try and develop long-term commercial partnerships.
So what are the reasons for the drop in levy? Is it because bookmakers are going offshore? Is it that punters are betting less? Why do we have less money?
That's a really good question, and there's a few aspects to it. Part of it is definitely the fact that the bookmakers have moved part of their businesses, and increasingly the channels that are more profitable and drive more volume, so internet and phone operations have moved offshore. Part of it is a decrease or a decline in margins, and I think also one of the challenges for the sport is market share within the bookmakers' total betting market. So there's a few factors at play there. our challenge is to keep our product really interesting from a customer perspective. Part of that is around field sizes, part of that is about the quality of the product that we put on. The other challenges though are to deal with capturing the offshore element, and part of it in having competitive field sizes is also that drives better margins from the bookmaker's perspective. So small field sizes tend to drive lower margins. Short price favourites drive lower margins, and whenever we're on a gross revenue model or a gross margin model, having sort of sustainable and solid margins is really important to us.
So less Frankel.
Less Frankel, yeah. That's the paradox, isn't it? That the greatest horse that we're ever likely to see will draw thousands of people through the gate. In a way, that's that won't be a great result for the levy, but it's a fabulous result for the sport overall.
So looking to the future, in 50 years' time, will the horse racing industry and the levy still be dependent on betting?
Well, I wouldn't even probably look out 50 years, to be honest. I mean, I think that you will see over the next 5 to 10 years a merging of those key revenue streams within the sport. I think they'll be distinct in the sense that they'll be quantified distinctly, but I actually think the commercial arrangements under which they're captured will increasingly merge. And part of that is that the bookmakers do pay for media rights and they do pay levy. Part of our need as a sport is to work with the bookmakers and partner with the bookmakers and take a long-term view of what the sport and the commercials of the sport look like and try and reach a sensible contemporary commercial arrangement with them. So betting will always play a very important role within the sport of racing, and it'll play a very important role in the revenues of racing, but I think increasingly over a period of time you'll see those key revenue streams actually come together under umbrella agreements.
And the important factor here is that you believe in British racing as a product, as in it's something people want to buy and pay for, therefore they should pay a reasonable amount for it. But equally, you understand that the bookmakers will try and take everything they can and give as little as possible. And you very much have tried to form this relationship with bookmakers, that they are friends of your product.
Yeah, I mean, friends is an interesting word to use, and it's probably one that sometimes I get a bit of criticism from within racing about, that I'm a bit too friendly with the bookmakers, to be honest. But the reality is that the bookmakers and the racecourses are our windows to the customer, and everything that we do should be consumer focused. And the better the consumer model is and the better the revenues that we can drive from the consumer side, the better the outcomes on prize money and for horsemen will be. So I guess I'm unashamedly trying to build relationships with the betting industry. And I think that racing has historically made a mistake in being really antagonistic towards the betting industry. They're a very powerful, commercial, they're good lobbyists, and to be honest, it's effective for us to partner with them. As I said, they're our window to the customer. There are a lot of people within the betting industry that have a great love of our sport and actually are looking for the sport to promote itself and probably categorise its racing product in a way that they can make as appealing as possible to the customer. So, I mean, I guess while ever I'm in this role, I make no apologies for the fact that I'll look to work with the bookmakers. Friends is probably quite a strong word, but I take your point.
We've already seen, of course, the problems you face, Paul. At the ROA meeting, the Racecourse Owners Association President Rachel Hood said, you, Paul Bittar, have already been taken to task for suggesting the betting industry here makes the biggest financial contribution to British racing, when it is, of course, the owners, who are by far the biggest contributors. And there we have it, the big problem, a divide between betting and owners.
It is, absolutely, and you're right. I mean, Rachel has a role as president of the ROA, and she takes that role and responsibility very seriously, and she advocates a position, very well, to be honest. But what I'd say is that whenever I get asked about, who makes the greater contribution or who's more important, is it the owner or is it the punter? To be honest, I find the question a little bit redundant because they're not mutually exclusive. We shouldn't.
Paul, it's not so much what you're putting in, but what you get out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, as I said, the punters are at the consumer end and the owners are really at the producer end. And to, I guess, focus on one group at the expense of the other is not necessarily our role. And it probably also, Matt, distinguishes the role of the BHA as opposed to the role of the ROA. So the ROA rightly focus on owners, they rightly focus on the producer end and what are owners going to get out of the sport. Our role has to be bigger than that. But as I said, to try and compartmentalise them or choose one over the other, I think is illogical. And in the long term for the sport, it's not going to drive an outcome. To be honest, both are critically important.
So when do you think that levy will be finally, you'll think you've got a deal on your table that you go home to the missus at night and you say, I tell you what, Paul Bittar, you've done it. This is a good job, well done on the levy.
Well, first things first, I try, when I go home at night, I try not to bore Jackie too much with that sort of thing. But
she'll love this.
Yeah, she would actually. I think there's two aspects to it, and they run in parallel. So once we lock the 50-second scheme away, hopefully over the next week or so, we will, we'll re-embark and we'll recommence discussions with bookmakers at a commercial level about long-term arrangements. In parallel to that, we are really looking to a legislative solution to the levy. And the reason that legislation is important to us, or some protection is important to the sport, is not because we think that we need some kind of handout from government, but the reason it's important is that if, say, we did 5-year commercial agreements with bookmakers, what we can't afford to do is get to the end of the 5 years and then have no support network or no sustainable mechanism that we can rely on to be there, because our leverage.
So effectively they're like a sponsor you don't want a sponsor who can suddenly pull out.
That's exactly right. So what we need to do is two things. We genuinely need to work on long-term arrangements with betting partners. In parallel to that, we need to come up with a sustainable replacement to the levy system. So those things actually should happen in parallel over the next 12 to 24 months. Realistically, you're not going to see an end to the levy in the next 24 to probably 30 months, simply because of the legislative time frame. We've now lost John Penrose as our minister. We've got a new minister in there. So those processes take a lot of time through government. But it is a two-pronged attack. They run in parallel, and both are quite important. I think it'd be naive for us to think that we could just do commercial agreements with bookmakers and then rely on the goodwill of both parties to renegotiate those fairly at the end of that time. I think it's important, and you've seen in Australia and you'll soon see in Ireland, the reason that it's important to have some kind of underlying legislation in place to protect the sport, not to provide a subsidy to the sport.